The delivery room was tense. Beads of sweat dripped from Lisa Carter's forehead as she gripped the hospital bed rails, exhausted from hours of labor. The doctors and nurses moved with routine efficiency until the moment the child arrived. The room fell into an unnatural silence. Dr. Levin, an experienced obstetrician, hesitated as he cradled the newborn in his gloved hands. His breath hitched. Something was different. The baby wasn't crying. His large, almost luminous eyes were wide open, staring straight at him. Infants weren't supposed to hold eye contact like this, not with such intensity, such awareness. The nurse beside him stepped back instinctively, her voice barely above a whisper. "Doctor, he's staring at you." Levin swallowed hard. Babies cried, wriggled, clenched their tiny fists in reflex. But this child? He was unnervingly still, watching, studying. His skin, impossibly smooth, had an almost unnatural clarity under the bright overhead lights. Lisa, exhausted but desperate to see her child, lifted her head weakly. Is everything okay?" The doctor hesitated before forcing a smile. "He's healthy. Just unusually alert." As Levin gently placed the baby in Lisa's arms, he felt an unfamiliar chill creep over him. Something about this child unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Outside the delivery room, behind the small glass window of the door, a man in a dark suit observed in silence. His posture was stiff, his expression unreadable as he whispered into a concealed earpiece. "It's happening. The boy has arrived." And with that, the world had changed forever. Within weeks, news of the child spread. The hospital staff, bound by confidentiality agreements, had tried to keep the details quiet, but rumors always had a way of slipping through the cracks. The media ran wild with speculation. A baby like no other, unexplainable intelligence? The future of humanity, or a scientific anomaly? Talk shows buzzed with theories. Could this be the next step in evolution? One expert pondered. Or is something else at play here? People camped outside the Carter home, hoping for a glimpse. Some believed he was a gift from above. Others feared he was something unnatural. Scientists petitioned to run tests, but James and Lisa refused. Inside their modest home in New York, they tried to maintain normalcy. Lisa rocked Nathan gently in the nursery, humming a lullaby. James leaned against the doorway, rubbing his temples. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. "We can't even leave the house without reporters swarming us." Lisa sighed. "He's just a baby, James. He didn't ask for any of this." James nodded but said nothing. Deep down, he knew their son wasn't just a baby. And soon, they would have no choice but to face the truth. One restless night, James found himself wandering into the nursery. He expected to find Nathan asleep. Instead, he found him sitting upright in his crib, waiting. James froze. Nathan, barely a year old, was watching him again, silent, motionless. His gaze was piercing, intelligent. James chuckled nervously. "Can't sleep, buddy?" And then, he heard it. A voice. But it wasn't in the room. It was inside his head. "Why are you afraid of me, Daddy?" James stumbled back, his heartbeat hammering. He stared at his son in disbelief. Nathan hadn't spoken. His lips never moved. And yet, James had heard the words as clearly as if they had been whispered directly into his ear. Lisa appeared at the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "James? What's wrong?" James looked at his wife, then back at their son. The baby still sat there, staring, silent. His mind raced for an explanation, lack of sleep, stress, imagination. But deep down, he knew better. Forcing a smile, he murmured, "Nothing's wrong." But something was very, very wrong. Miles away, inside a high-security research facility, a scientist stared at her monitor in disbelief. She had been analyzing surveillance footage from outside the Carter home. The baby's toys were moving. Not in a normal, clumsy infant way. No hands touched them. They shifted, floated, rearranged, without explanation. Her fingers trembled as she pressed a button on the intercom. "Sir, we have a situation. If we don't act now, someone else will." Somewhere in Washington, behind closed doors, a decision was made. Nathan Carter had to be contained. That night, Lisa woke with a jolt. A loud crash echoed downstairs. James was already up, grabbing the baseball bat beside their bed. "Stay here. Lock the door." Lisa clutched Nathan tightly, her pulse racing. The sound of heavy footsteps crept up the stairs. The floorboards groaned under their weight. Lisa held her breath. Nathan, however, remained calm. He looked up at her with the same unsettling awareness he had always carried. And then, she heard his voice, inside her mind. "Don't be scared, Mommy." The bedroom door burst open. A masked man lunged forward. But before he could take another step, his body jerked violently and froze in place. His limbs locked, his breath hitched in his throat. He was paralyzed. Lisa gasped, gripping Nathan tighter. Another intruder rushed in, only to stop mid-stride, his eyes wide with terror as his muscles seized. Then another. And another. Each man locked in place, unable to move. Lisa turned to Nathan. His small hand was raised slightly, fingers curling as if gripping something invisible. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Lisa's voice trembled. "Nathan, what are you?" Nathan slowly turned his head to look at her, his face unreadable. "I don't know yet, Mommy." Outside, black SUVs peeled away into the night. Inside one of them, a man in a dark suit adjusted his earpiece. "We underestimated him. He's far stronger than expected. The world isn't ready, but we can't wait any longer." The vehicle disappeared into the darkness. And in a quiet house, Lisa held her son close, knowing life as they knew it was over. Nathan Carter was no ordinary child. And the world was about to find out just how extraordinary he truly was. Lisa sat on the nursery floor, rocking Nathan in her arms. The bedroom light flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows across the walls. The masked men, who had broken into their home only moments ago, were now lifelessly sprawled on the ground. Not dead, but unmoving. Frozen in a way that defied all logic. James stood by the door, the baseball bat in his grip useless now. His chest rose and fell in sharp breaths as he tried to process what he had just seen. Nathan had stopped them. Not with his hands. Not with any visible effort. But with something far greater. Lisa finally found her voice. "James, what do we do?" James didn't answer. He was staring at the nearest intruder, watching as the man's fingers twitched ever so slightly. The paralysis was fading. They didn't have much time. Without a word, James grabbed Lisa's wrist and pulled her to her feet. "We have to leave. Now." Lisa hesitated, tightening her grip on Nathan. "Go where?" James didn't know. But one thing was clear, if they stayed, they wouldn't live to see morning. James threw open the garage door and climbed into the driver's seat. Lisa slid into the back, cradling Nathan against her chest. As soon as the tires screeched against the pavement, Lisa turned back toward the house. "What if they follow us?" James gripped the wheel tightly. "They will." Lisa's breath trembled. "James, who were they?" James shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever they are, they knew about Nathan. And they weren't here to talk." Nathan remained silent in Lisa's arms. He wasn't crying, wasn't afraid. His small fingers rested calmly on Lisa's shoulder, his eyes half-lidded, as if he knew this was only the beginning. And he was right. Because they weren't the only ones running. Somewhere in Washington, a high-level meeting was taking place. A long mahogany table stretched across the dimly lit room. Faces were illuminated only by the faint glow of classified documents on tablet screens. A man in a pressed black suit leaned forward. "You're telling me a 1-year-old child took down an entire squad?" The scientist across from him nodded grimly. "Not just take them down. Controlled them." Silence hung thick in the air. Another official, a woman with short silver hair, exhaled sharply. "Then we need to contain him. Before someone else does." A younger officer hesitated. "Contain? He's a child." The silver-haired woman narrowed her eyes. "He won't be a child forever." A thick file was pushed across the table, labeled in bold red letters, Operation Nemesis. The order was signed. "Find the boy. Capture him. At all costs." James and Lisa had been driving for hours. The city lights had faded into darkness, replaced by the endless stretch of highway. Lisa turned to Nathan, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Baby, are you okay?" Nathan blinked up at her. Then, in the stillness of the car, she heard it again. "They're coming." Lisa's throat tightened. "Who, sweetheart?" Nathan didn't blink. "Everyone." Lisa's hands trembled as she turned to James. He just spoke to me again." James didn't need to ask how. He could see the fear in her eyes. And then, a sudden boom erupted behind them. Lisa spun around. In the distance, headlights flared. Black SUVs tore down the highway, gaining on them fast. "James," she screamed. James slammed the gas pedal. The speedometer shot up. The car roared forward, but the SUVs only accelerated. Lisa gripped Nathan tightly. "What do we do?" Nathan exhaled softly. And then, the car shifted. The entire vehicle seemed to glide unnaturally, as if something unseen had taken control. The wheel tugged against James's hands, swerving the car onto a side road, narrow, hidden, leading deep into the woods. James barely had time to react. I didn't turn the wheel." Lisa's breath hitched. She turned to Nathan. His tiny hand was resting gently against the car door. His expression remained unreadable. James didn't question it. He just drove. The road twisted through dense trees. The night pressed in around them. And then, headlights appeared in front of them. They had been cut off. Lisa gasped as figures in tactical gear stepped into the road, weapons raised. Red laser dots flashed against the windshield. James cursed under his breath, slamming the brakes. The tires skidded, and the car came to a shuddering halt. Silence. Then, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears. "James, what do we do?" James clenched his fists. "We protect our son." The armed men took slow, calculated steps toward them. The leader, a man in a bulletproof vest marked government classified unit, raised a megaphone. "We don't want to hurt you. We just want the boy." Lisa's breath hitched. No, please." Nathan turned his head toward the men outside. His eyes darkened. The air suddenly felt thick, heavy. The soldiers' movements became sluggish. Some hesitated, shifting uneasily. One clutched his throat as if he couldn't breathe. And then, one by one, they dropped their weapons. Their faces twisted in confusion, then terror. The leader took a staggering step back. "What the hell is?" His voice cut off. His body lifted off the ground, slowly, effortlessly, as if he were weightless. Lisa gasped, clutching Nathan close. James whispered, "Oh my God." Nathan wasn't moving. But something was moving for him. The commander's breath came in choked gasps as he hovered in the air. His limbs trembled. And then, just as suddenly, he dropped to the ground. Nathan's gaze softened. "They won't follow us anymore." James and Lisa didn't wait to find out if he was right. James threw the car into reverse, tires spinning against the dirt road. They vanished into the darkness. Behind them, the soldiers remained frozen, some staring at the night sky, others trembling on the ground. And in the black SUV parked farthest from the road, a man sat in silence, watching everything unfold. He didn't speak. Didn't move. He simply pulled out his phone and sent a single message. "The boy is beyond our expectations. We may have lost him tonight, but we will not lose him forever." The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. Nathan Carter was no longer just a child. He was a force. And soon, the whole world would want him. News stations around the globe were in chaos. From Washington to Moscow, Beijing to London, the name Nathan Carter had become an international obsession. Leaked footage of his abilities had surfaced, grainy security footage, eyewitness accounts, and even classified government reports had somehow made their way onto the internet. The world was no longer questioning whether Nathan was real. Now, they were asking something far more terrifying. What is he? Governments scrambled for control. Conspiracies spread like wildfire. Some believed he was a government experiment gone rogue. Others whispered of extraterrestrial origins. Religious leaders called him a sign of the end times. But while the world debated, one thing was certain. Nathan Carter was no longer a child. He was now a man. And he was done running. James and Lisa had spent the last decade in hiding. Moving from country to country. Changing names, erasing footprints. They had watched their son grow into something they barely understood. And now he was standing before them, his expression unreadable. Lisa reached for his face, her voice trembling. "Nathan, please, whatever you're planning." Nathan gently took her hand. His touch was warm, but his eyes carried something distant. "It's time, Mom." James frowned. "Time for what?" Nathan turned toward the window, where the city lights of New York shimmered below. "Time for the world to see me for who I really am." The moment Nathan Carter stepped back into public view, the world reacted. America wanted him under military control. China called him an international threat. Russia viewed him as a national security weapon. And in the shadows, secret organizations that had existed for centuries plotted to either control him or eliminate him. But Nathan wasn't the same helpless child they once pursued. He was ready for them this time. The attack came at midnight. Helicopters thundered over the city skyline. Black-clad soldiers flooded the streets. Civilians screamed as their homes were raided, every corner of the city locked in a full-scale government operation. But Nathan stood calm in the storm. Lisa clutched James's hand. "They're coming for him." James swallowed hard. They have no idea what they're walking into. Nathan closed his eyes. And then everything stopped. The helicopters froze in midair, their blades motionless. Soldiers who had been charging suddenly halted, their bodies locked in place. The entire city fell into an unnatural silence. It was as if time itself had bent to Nathan's will. James whispered, "Oh my God." Nathan turned to his parents, his voice steady. "It's okay." He lifted his hand, just slightly. And with that simple motion, the armed forces dropped their weapons. Tanks reversed. Missiles powered down. The very war machines built to destroy him, now bowed to his command. The world was watching. And the world was terrified. As the world held its breath, Nathan stepped forward. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters clutched their microphones. Millions watched from their screens, waiting for the moment that would change history. And then, he spoke. "I am not here to rule you." Gasps rippled across the crowd. Nathan's voice was calm but unshakable. "I am not your enemy. I am not your weapon. I am not your experiment." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But I will no longer be hunted." Somewhere in Washington, the president stared at the screen, his fingers tightening into a fist. Somewhere in China, a military general slammed his desk in frustration. Somewhere in Russia, a silent order was given. If we cannot own him, we must end him. And just like that, the kill order was signed. Nathan felt it before it happened. The missile was coming. Launched from an undisclosed location, designed to wipe out everything in a 10-mile radius. Lisa gasped as she saw it streaking across the sky. "Nathan." James's eyes widened. "They're going to kill you." Nathan simply closed his eyes. And in that moment, he made his final decision. He wasn't going to fight anymore. He wasn't going to run anymore. Nathan Carter vanished. Not in a burst of light. Not in a dramatic explosion. He simply ceased to exist. And with him, the missile froze in midair, before disintegrating into dust. The world fell into stunned silence. Lisa collapsed to her knees, whispering his name. James could do nothing but stare at the empty space where their son had once stood. Nathan was gone. And no one, not the government, not the nations, not even the most powerful forces on Earth, would ever find him again. The world searched for him. For years, intelligence agencies, scientists, and world leaders hunted for any trace of the boy who had once held the world in his grasp. But there was nothing. No sightings. No evidence. No explanation. Nathan Carter had simply disappeared from history. But some still believed. Some whispered that he was out there, watching. Waiting. And one day, he might return.